Welcome to All Right in Sin City, a podcast about writers and writing in the Windsor-Detroit region. Your podcasters today are
Sarah Jarvis, former bookseller, publishing rep, and literary festival chair.
Kim Conklin, Windsor-based writer and filmmaker.
And me, Irene Moore Davis, author, educator, and local historian. This recording takes place online with safe physical distancing. Our featured guest today is Brian G. Gilmore. Brian G. Gilmore was born and raised in Washington, D.C. He is the author of 3 previous collections of poetry, including We Didn't Know Any Gangsters, a 2014 NAACP Image Award nominee. He is both a Cave Canem Fellow and a Kimbilio Fellow, and he currently teaches social justice law at Michigan State University. Brian joins us today to talk about his Michigan notable book of poetry, Come See About Me, Marvin, from Wayne State University Press. In this latest collection, Brian imagines a dialogue between himself and Marvin Gaye, another Black man from Washington, D.C., who moved here to follow his career. The poems were written in part as a way of coping in a strange new land. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much. That was a great introduction. Very well. Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. So it's been said that you looked to Marvin Gaye for an example of how to be in this new place. How would you describe your relationship with Marvin Gaye's music before you came to Michigan, and how has that changed?
It's a great question. I would, like most people, I listened to Marvin Gaye a lot. He was a big star anyway. I always knew he was from Washington, D.C. and everything. But it wasn't until I got out here and I noticed that the strength of Motown music in Michigan, even outside of Detroit, the music is very strong and prevalent where you go. People are very proud of it. So I just took it to reading his biography, one of his biographies, which is Divided Soul. And it talked a lot about him leaving Washington and things like that. And he first went to Chicago, which I didn't know, and he settled in Detroit and things like that. And it talked about where he lived, and dealing with the cold and people he hung out with. So it kind of began from there. And because of that, now I kind of look at his music much more personal for me, that kind of thing, in terms of, I began to write the book. And I said, well, he left that city where I'm from, just like me, many years ago. So I began to turn over in my head, like, what were you thinking and things like that at particular times. I mean, I know he had a great career. He was a big star, but he was a very individual type person as well. Very strong-willed and everything. The whole story about him wanting to put out his album, what's going on, and they didn't want to put it out. And then he said, if you don't put it out, I'm never recording again, that kind of thing. And it's interesting, I'll just say, finish that question with an anecdote, is June 1st, today is June 1st. On June 1st, 1970 is the date that he recorded the song, What's Going On. But it didn't come out for another year because they refused to put it out. And he's recorded it, though, 50 years ago today. So, which is kind of interesting as well.
So which came first, your interest in the law and social justice, or your interest in poetry, in writing poetry?
I would probably have to lean toward poetry because I was in high school. I went to a school, Archbishop Carroll High School, which was a great experience for me, a liberal arts education, which is so important, I think. And one of the big tenets of that education was poetry. I had an English professor who was a big Shakespeare person, and he exposed me heavily to poetry. And then in my own home, my parents exposed me to some Black poets like Paul Laurence Dunbar and things like that. So then, you get the education, and then you begin to turn the values over in your head. The liberal arts education sort of makes you begin to consider the moral values and things like that. So then later on, the desire to help people who didn't have lawyers got into me. I mean, so the two came together like a little bit later on. So the poetry was definitely the first thing that grabbed me.
Do you write in other genres? Fiction?
Yeah, I write fiction. I've written fiction. I have published some short stories. I've written a lot of essays and things like that. Like I published an essay. The first thing I published in Michigan was, in fact, an essay called Letter from Lansing, and it's about going to a union rally. And, being from Washington, D.C., you would never, ever get that experience of going to a union rally, a UAW down in Lansing. That's just another world for us. So when I knew this rally was going on, I said, well, let me go down here because I want to see this. I want to feel this kind of thing. So then I wrote an essay about it called Letter from Lansing. So I write a lot of essays, things like that, short commentary, things like that. I just wrote something for the Progressive magazine about COVID-19 and the disproportionate number of Black people who are being affected by it. So try to do everything. And even lately, I've been doing film study, trying to take some of my writings, especially like poetry, and converting it into films and things like that. So it's a lot going on in my head.
There are many beautiful images in your book, but some of the most arresting are about cold. What was it that surprised you most about the cold?
Oh man, it was it's still like unbelievable how cold it can get here. And I guess a couple years after I got here in 2010, was the year of the polar vortex, and it was just so cold. The ice was inside the door of your house. It's just so cold. And then it was cold, and then sometimes it's cold here in May. It's still cold. So my mother came here in May, one of my first years out here. She came to visit, and when she left, she was like, "I'm never coming to visit again." She's like, "It's just too cold." It was still cold in May. So that is something that I've adjusted to. I went to undergraduate college in Frostburg State College in Maryland, which is similar kind of climate. But this right here is just biting type cold in Michigan, and even much more so than other states. It gets cold in the Midwest, but Michigan is one of the top ones, I would say. I guess it's because it's a peninsula and it's in between. It's right there on those lakes. I keep trying to explain to people that Michigan is a peninsula and it's like Florida, except instead of always hot, it's always cold. And that kind of gets them to understand it. So, but it's definitely was a big theme in the book, I would say. Out of place kind of feeling like, how could it be this cold? It's supposed to be warm. I mean, it's supposed to be warm. It's May the 20th. It was cold 2 weeks ago here.
Well, it was a big theme in the book. And I was wondering if when you talk about cold, if it wasn't sometimes a metaphor for a little bit more than the weather. Is that possible?
Yeah, it's a few of those. One of the, sometime in there, I'm trying to, I guess one short poem in there, it might be the haiku about the Black Lives Matter sign. And there was a lot of unrest at the time. And I just happened to take that picture, and it dawned on me when I looked at it. I was like, that's amazing that this, that's kind of like the feeling that people feel. This sign was sitting in the middle of this huge white field of white snow. And then it was this little Black Lives Matter sign. So it was occasionally diversions into that kind of thing as well. I mean, the coldness kind of thing. But, cold, I always say, I've written about the cold in previous books. The cold can make you act kind of strange, almost anybody. It's definitely preoccupies your mind. This is tough. The cold is a tough deal to deal with.
So in the poem Chicago, you seem to feel a bit warmer. What did you find was different about Chicago?
So I must say that I didn't realize until I got here that Chicago was such, it was the city was the Midwest metropolis, famous name that Richard Wright gave it and everything like that. So I didn't realize, I had been to Chicago before that, many times, but just didn't realize what a center of gravity it was for people in the Midwest. And so it became our center of gravity as a family, because we would begin to go down there. We didn't go to Ann Arbor or Detroit. We went to Chicago. I want to say we went to Chicago more than any other city since we've been here. Like in visits. And Ann Arbor was probably second. Detroit was probably third. So it just became a place of culture and just to go and museums, see friends, have a lot of friends there. One of my mentors is there, Haki Matabuti, the poet. If it wasn't for this coronavirus thing, we probably would have gone down there and spent a couple days down there and things like that. My daughter is a dancer, so oftentimes her auditions would be in Chicago, the Ballet of Chicago, and we would go spend the weekend. She would have her audition on Saturday. So Chicago was a magical place for us, but it was also part of the book as well, as you probably saw all the poems in it. A lot of Michigan poems, but it's also scattered number of poems about other places in the Midwest that I found intriguing as well. So it definitely fit with the theme of the book all the way.
And you write very powerfully about loneliness. Do you find that writing about it makes you feel less lonely, or you feel better about feeling lonely?
So it became, so one song, as you saw in there, there's a couple poems in there called Distant Lover. And Marvin Gaye has a song called Distant Lover. So it became like the theme of being alone and loneliness kind of rests within that song. So it became, who is the distant lover? And that's up for the reader to ponder, to tell the truth. And it's a lot of things who the distant lover could be. As I should say, at the time I wrote this book, my wife took a contractual job in D.C. teaching English just to make some money. And we have 3 daughters, so I was here with them doing my job and everything. And that's kind of like where I began to really write about these themes. I'm actually here with my children alone, 3 teenage girls growing up. And it was just a lot of, I would say it was a lot of that theme is within the book. And I won't say I felt it made me feel less lonely. I don't think it made me feel any less lonely. It just was something I thought of at the time, that here I am, because I would get a chance to go to DC and that would help me out. I would I would go to DC, my mother and brother and friends and family still live there. In the summer I would go maybe for a month. For Christmas I would go and stay like a month. So I would get away, but it wouldn't, when I was here, it didn't make writing about it. It might have even made me feel worse, if you know what I mean, kind of thing.
So how has the lockdown, the pandemic lockdown affected your work? Is that does it affect your writing? Have you been able to write during this time, or has it just been too detached?
I've been writing. I've been writing a lot about the lockdown a little bit. I mean, I have ongoing writing projects and things like that. Hasn't affected it that much. I mean, we were teaching. Our teaching schedule remained the same, but I continue to try to keep a steady writing and reading schedule each day. But mostly, you become sort of like you start wondering about the things going on, about the pandemic and everything. The main thing was I began reading and writing about things related to pandemics, which sounds crazy, but I did. I mean, and I learned that my grandfather had been born. My grandfather was born in 1878 in Louisiana, and he was born during a yellow fever pandemic. I just learned that just by being in the house and things like that. So it hasn't been that bad, but you get to the point where you just want to go out, and even if you just go out and sit in the yard, right? I mean, I miss going to the movie theater and I miss things like that. So you can't do that. But other than that, I've been managing pretty well. I hope you all been as well. So it's pretty crazy, to tell the truth. Never lived in a pandemic, although my mother would tell me that when I was a boy, there was a similar type thing that was going on. It just wasn't as bad as this. It was another so-called Asian flu, and there was a lot of hysteria going on. But this before social media, before 24/7 news to drive you crazy. So.
You also write with some touches of humor. You imagine yourself as George Bailey in a snowstorm and your driver as the angel Clarence, and also that you're a government-funded science experiment on the disease of loneliness. How do you approach using humor in your work?
Oh, yeah. I think you have to have that you have to have that kind of touch to it. I mean, I guess that's my general style, is to try to walk that line, so to speak, where seriousness and humor kind of connect. I don't want to be too cynical or too sarcastic, but you kind of need that in there sometimes. I mean, you probably know that sometimes these days, humor and seriousness works very well. I mean, it's kind of like the thing that I know that I rely on, in even the things I watch, like SNL and The Daily Show with Trevor Noah and things like that. Those are the things that I appreciate the most. And those are the things where I feel like I'm getting informed the best, rather than the news, which seems to be fighting for the opinion of various voting blocks all day long. And I feel like I can't even really watch it anymore. So I'm kind of drawn to where the humor is and the seriousness kind of come together, and I like that in the poetry, but not to make it too much of a joke, because I do want the reader to take the matter seriously, but they'll be able to tolerate it, I guess, because it comes to them kind of in a humorous way. That's the best way I can put it. But you always walking that fence, that thin line there between seriousness and humor. But I think you need that at some time. There's a lot of poetry out there where people just go hard, serious. And I think that's good. I think they should stay where they are. But me, myself, I kind of need that little bit of humor.
In another poem, you tell a sad story about being a lawyer during an eviction process. And the story, right. Did you really get hit over the head with a chair?
No, that didn't actually happen, but I'm trying to explain how ridiculous it is. I think it's the poem about the lawyers telling us, why are you all representing these tenants? And so the example I give is almost like where a priest is going to talk to someone who's kind of condemned to incarceration. And it's almost the same thing. To me, it was almost the same thing, same kind of concept there. And it was just so ridiculous that somebody would say that you don't even, I mean, this is a lawyer. I could expect that from like some random citizen. But this person who did tell us that event actually did happen, not the podium hitting anybody over the head, but a lawyer actually did tell us, why are we representing these tenants? And it just struck me, because we go to law school, and that's one of the first things they tell us in law school is how important it is for people to have lawyers, and people have a right to a lawyer. And this is not some republic where they try people and you don't pay your rent, they chop your arm off or something crazy like that. This is like still supposed to be a civil society, shall I say. And for me to hear that, I remember him saying that, and I just say this, just don't listen to that. It was like, to my students were standing there as well. I said, this is walk away. I mean, it's just so ridiculous of a statement, you know what I mean? That I just said, it's not even worth arguing over, because he knows better. I mean, he's talking out of his head. So, but that has happened more than once. That has happened more than once to us. Then why are we providing these tenants with legal representation? I mean, so, but I did not get hit in the head with a podium.
If you could talk to Marvin today, what would you want to talk to him about?
Oh man, I probably would want to talk to him about the What's Going On album, mostly because that's his most poignant album to most people. And the other thing I probably would ask him about is, the question I'm kind of asking in the book, which is how did he feel about DC, and it's some indications in his biographies that he left DC because he was displeased with the city, he was displeased with life there. I mean, he probably grew up, it was probably still a segregated city when he left there. But that's what I would love to talk to him about, that particular album, and then about how he felt at various times when he was living in Detroit and he was thinking of back home. Because I know he bought a nice house for his parents in DC once he started making money and things like that. And I know he would come back to DC a lot. So that's definitely what I would like to go into with him.
Are there any other musicians or artists you'd like to have this kind of poetic conversation with?
Right, probably many. I did write a book many years ago about Duke Ellington, but it's not written as like this, as a personal conversation. It's more about the history of the Duke Ellington band. And if you know, Duke Ellington is that other very famous Washington D.C. musician, probably far more famous than Marvin Gaye and things like that. So, I mean, I would love to talk to anybody. Probably would love to talk to Duke Ellington. But I used to write for Jazz Times magazine, so I had a chance to talk to a lot of jazz musicians over the years. So I would love to talk to so many jazz musicians. I mean, it's just so many out there. It's too many to name to talk to. The Motown artists, I would love to talk to any of them. And I always hear about these musicians who are Motown, and they're like still alive in Motown, and they're like living in obscurity. I was like, man, somebody should go down there and interview them. And I say, I should go down there and interview them. And I was like, I mean, I don't have time to do that. Somebody should interview a lot of these people where they just, Motown is not what it was, but it's such a big thing here. And that's one of the keys to this book ever even being written. That was even in the upper parts of Michigan before, and you would just go in to a place, some out of the way dive, and the jukebox would still be full of Motown records. And I was just like, and people would be playing Motown records, and it was like you just walked into a time machine. So I was like, this is incredible. But this is nowhere near Detroit. So they just go to show you the impact of that whole period had on the state overall. And there's so many singers here who sing. You'll go in to a bar or something, they'll be singing Motown. So that's definitely something that got me going in terms of being here and then writing the book.
So what are you working on now?
Well, probably a lot of things. Like I said, I've been writing a lot about the pandemic and things like that. I am trying to finish some short stories that I started many years ago about a lawyer. I mean, not a real lawyer, about a fictional lawyer. And then I'm also trying to finish this other book of poems about DC, the city of Washington, and how it's changed rapidly, has changed over years. Historically, over say like almost 100-year period, how it went from being a little sleepy little southern town to like this booming capital of the country that's now was once 80% Black, but now it's turning into this very diverse, dynamic kind of city that doesn't really have an identity like it used to have, but it's trying to figure it out. And I think if you saw the protests in DC over the last few days have been very fierce. I would say ferocious protests. I mean, to the point where the White House cut the lights off, which was pretty funny. I mean, they cut all the lights off. So, and that's something that would happen in D.C. But it just struck me that there, the energy there is much more diverse, and the crowd was very diverse. When I was a little boy, the Martin Luther King riots occurred, and that was Black people just disgusted with what happened with the murder of Martin Luther King. This right here there is a wide range of anger on a lot of levels, on a lot of issues, and people just all over. But in DC, it was particularly vicious and fierce down there. The energy was just amazing. People were calling me, and I was like, yeah, man, I'm watching it on TV. I'm finding this unbelievable, the way people are going at this down there. I mean, I was just amazed. I mean, they were like, they really let their voices be heard down there. I don't know how it was in other places, but they definitely in DC. And so, and Trump allegedly cut off the lights and they took him to a bunker. I found that to be pretty funny. So that's to get back to your question, though. I'm trying to put together what the city has, poems about the city's history, so to speak, over like a 80, 90-year period.
Would you like to read some of your poems for the audience?
All right, so I will read, like I said, a lot of poems in here are called Distant Lover, and it's always up to the reader to go where they want. I feel like the reader, it's up to them. But this is one I wrote when I had gone home. And when I got home, my mother knew I was coming home. My mother still lives there. She's 90 years old. She still lives there. So she made salmon cakes. I told her, I'm coming to DC. She made salmon cakes. And that was like one of my favorites. So, but this is called Distant Lover number 3. Mural of Marvin eating mumbo sauce. Churches falling apart, Jesus on the cross. Broke streets with stumble bums waving at buses. People on board shouting about lack of justice. And my mom's back home making salmon cakes. Kids these days no longer carry rakes. Movies I see take too many takes. My mom's back home making salmon cakes. I work now up by the Great Lakes. Few up there are really fakes. For goodness sakes, the city where I was formed relies on these lies. Skies and French fries, pies and those much needed highs. We baked this good in a city made of chocolate that was always darker, not lighter, and so much whiter. Just Ralph Ellison again, not visible. Invisible, not worried about being divisible. Back where it began, hidden slave march, public schools full of someone else's arts. So we created our own. Rototoms backing up like computer networks. They still rock beats, donning permanent smirks. Murals of Marvin eating mumbo sauce. Churches falling apart. Jesus on the cross. Broke streets with stumble bums waving at buses. People on board shouting about lack of justice. And my mom's back home making salmon cakes. And I'll read another one called Grand Rapids for KK. It's one of my students who was inspired by this poem. And this is one of the ones you asked a question earlier about the cold and the snow. So this is one of the ones that went into that. And it's kind of metaphorical at parts. Grand Rapids. Then the snow came, like in that book, Into Thin Air, and I was happy we weren't climbing the Himalayas. I was just on my way to Grand Rapids to do a seminar on discrimination. And we were just about there when someone tossed a bed sheet on our windshield and our tires became skates on a sheet of ice. Now I knew why much of the time on these trips you could look to the right or left and you could see cars in the trees, driver out, airbags engaged, cell phone in their ear. But my driver is part of this. She isn't from Michigan, but her blood is thick too. Indiana, Fort Wayne. And it is probably the same there, she says. She is calm as Philippe Petit on the wire between the towers. She a chef in a busy diner with one broken stove. She a teller in a crowded bank full of weekend check cashers, computers down. We will make it to the spot, show our PowerPoint. I will speak because I am George Bailey. She is Clarence diving in the water. We could have been in the trees, freezing and waiting for a tow with cell phones low on battery. Instead, I am like Freddie Hubbard, following Hancock, my trumpet riffing and redlining, blockbusting, and acts that aren't fair anywhere I can think of in any part of the world. This is my road. Throw a white sheet over the computer, and I still can play the melody. I am Brian Boitano or Scott Hamilton, sliding easy across the carpet of a conference room at some raggedy hotel. But don't ask me to ever drive alone through these roads. I leave those miracles to the locals. All right, I'll just read one more. And I'll read a piece called Kalamazoo Boogie, which was I tried to do a lot of different kind of poems here, and this was a kind of rhyming call and response poem. And Kalamazoo is actually a city that I've visited many times in my work and for pleasure. Really liked my time there. I guess that's why I wrote this poem. Kalamazoo Boogie. Give me a word that rhymes with voodoo. My children shout loud, Kalamazoo. Teju Cole, born in Kalamazoo, putting down words, holla hoodoo. There is a city here named for St. Lou, far up north from Kalamazoo. A bunch of poets in Kalamazoo are always sure their verse rings true. Haiku, tanka, sonnet, and stew, ghazal, elegy, Kalamazoo. Took a trip down to Kalamazoo in search of Jesus, in search of you. No one knows or haven't a clue the origin of the word Kalamazoo. Indigenous inhabitants of Kalamazoo, they got their own ways, got their own hue. The running joke now, Timbuktu, if you don't know where, Kalamazoo. Highway 131, Kalamazoo. In 74, they closed the city zoo. Sold a bookmobile in 2012, but people love poetry in Kalamazoo. Bonnie Joe Campbell lives in Kalamazoo. American salvage, totally true. Yankee named Jeter lived here too. Boy learned the ball in Kalamazoo. Met a judge born in Kalamazoo. Loves his mom, she was born there too. Inside his courtroom, I think of the zoo. Men in shackles from Kalamazoo. If only they had listened down in Kalamazoo. Now they gotta do what they tell them to do. Remember the guy who picked up a shoe, tried to clock the prayers, some desert snafu. Wasn't Kalamazoo that rhymes with kazoo? Yahoo, Yahoo, this poem sniffs glue. Shout out a city that rhymes with shampoo. Once I ate some conies in Kalamazoo. Thanks.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. This was great.
It was great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. Look for more episodes of All Right in Sin City wherever you listen to podcasts, or check out our website, allrightinsincity.com. For information and announcements of new podcasts, sign up to our email list or follow us on Facebook and Twitter.